This is what college football would have looked like if the Big East collapsed in 2004. Yes, it's another conference realignment remix. I wouldn't call the Big East foray into football a failure, but it definitely didn't have the staying power that I would imagine that they imagined they would have had when they started sponsoring football in 1991. And a big part of that move was signing Miami to a deal to all sports. They joined the conference in all sports in 1991 as a part of that football initiative. And Miami was a huge get, right? They're one of the most dominant programs of the 80s, and they continued that success into the 90s, actually winning the national championship or being co-national national champions with Washington in 91, the first year that the conference sponsored football. And they continued that success throughout the 90s and early 2000s, showing up in 4 different national championship games and winning in 91 and then winning the BCS national championship game in 2001. But outside of Miami and Virginia Tech, who had the 1999 BCS National Championship game that they went to and lost, there wasn't that same level of success from the rest of the conference. And there really wasn't a deep conference. There was only 8 teams there, and most of those schools were basketball schools first, obviously being the Big East. So while the Big East had this crazy success in basketball in the 80s, 90s, and really all the way through till now, even as they've separated into a new conference, football just never really caught on in the Northeast in college football for whatever reason. So come 2004, the ACC is looking to expand and specifically focusing on football in their expansion talks, and they go after Miami and Syracuse to add them to the Big East. And that was all but a done deal until the Virginia governor or chancellor, whoever, steps in and essentially forces Virginia's hand in making sure that it's Virginia Tech that gets added to the conference as opposed to Syracuse, and that's what eventually goes through. In 2004, Miami and Virginia Tech join the ACC, and the following year in 2005, Boston College follows. And this starts kind of a mad dash for the Big East to stay alive in college football. They start pulling from Conference USA, teams like Louisville, South Florida, Cincinnati, trying to boost their conference and stay alive in college football. And more importantly, keep their BCS conference status, which was at risk after they lost those teams. The BCS said, all right, we're going to look at the next 3 years, and based on the success of the next 3 years, we'll either take away BCS national or BCS conference status or add BCS conference status based on what the results would look like. And this whole thing really just added to what would eventually be the 2011, 12, 13 kind of dash for conference realignment. The Big East was a major part of that because there were still some quality teams in the Big East, namely West Virginia. Connecticut was a strong team there, Rutgers, and then the teams they added as well being Louisville, Cincinnati, South Florida, mainly Louisville in that adding, and then some of the teams that they went after later on like TCU, Boise State. There was a lot of movement around all of those teams because the Big East was kind of a vortex that started in the mid-2000s that was never really going to be stable enough after losing Miami to stay afloat. But what if it didn't go down that way? What if instead of the Big East trying to stay alive and trying to make this football thing happen, even without really their main participant in that whole college football setup leaving and abandoning the conference, what if they just did what they eventually did in 2013, which is the Catholic Seven, the main college basketball schools that didn't sponsor college football, separated from the conference or just closed down the rest of the conference, kicked the other schools out, and said, we're going to be a basketball conference, we're going to be a baseball conference, whatever else we're going to be, but we are not going to sponsor football anymore. And the rest of those teams were kind of sent off on their way. What would that have looked like? And it starts with the ACC, and it would look like Clemson, Duke, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Maryland, North Carolina, NC State, Wake Forest, Virginia, and they add from the Big East, Virginia Tech, Miami, Boston College, Syracuse, Rutgers, UConn, and Pitt. Now, the conference is a little big here, but I'm not going out on a limb as far as any of these teams being added to the ACC. Really, Rutgers and Connecticut are the only ones here that never spent any time in the ACC, and along with Maryland, they're the only teams that aren't even currently in the ACC. So this definitely is not a weird lineup for the ACC. And the other thing is that all of these states have an Eastern Seaboard. I might be wrong about Pennsylvania. I'm not going to look it up, but I'm pretty sure that Pennsylvania has an Eastern Seaboard. So all of these teams are actually Atlantic Coast teams, which is more than can be said for the current ACC. So I think that this adds strength in numbers as well as just in programs. I mean, Virginia Tech and Miami obviously were great ads at the time. Miami hasn't had the success anywhere near the success that they had in the Big East, and definitely not the success they had as an independent prior to joining the Big East since they've been in the ACC. Maybe they're turning their fortunes around currently, but at this time, when they added them, it was a long slog of Miami trying to get back to the top. But Syracuse, of course, was a team that they were interested in at the time. Rutgers is a pretty strong football team, maybe not in success-wise, but viewership, the amount of people that they get to go to their games, the market that they control, it is a very valuable ad for the ACC. Connecticut, maybe not so much with football, but Connecticut is, UConn is one of the strongest basketball programs across the country, and adding that into this conference is incredible. Of course, Pitt is a very strong team as well, owning the Pittsburgh market. So this actually is kind of a crazy strong conference if they were able to activate those markets that they're looking to activate with the additions that they have here. And they really own all of the East Coast. And I kind of mentioned it with UConn, but this would be a crazy strong basketball program in the mid 2000s and 2004 when this was put together. Even now, this is a very strong basketball program. But I mean, Duke, UNC, Virginia, Syracuse, UConn, these are all very, very strong basketball programs. Pitt, this would kind of be the last year of Wake Forest with Chris Paul, I think, in 2004. So, I mean, there's tons of strong, and Maryland was really strong at this time as well. There's tons of strong basketball programs in this conference to go along with the football prowess that they would have, and just the numbers they would have, definitely being one of the stronger conferences up there, probably above the Big Ten and the Pac-10 at the time, up there with the Big 12 and the SEC at this time. But of course, that leaves behind a couple of schools, namely West Virginia, kind of left out in the ether to find their way. I just don't think that West Virginia has the academic prowess that the ACC has kind of continued to look for in expansion talks. They weren't really the greatest football program. They were about to hit the Rich Rod, Pat White era, but they weren't good enough in football, good enough in basketball to really warrant ACC overlooking their academic standards in comparison to the rest of the schools they have in the conference. So I didn't think that they would go after West Virginia. So that kind of leaves West Virginia out there in the ether. And there's a couple other teams in the G5 kind of area that are interesting to look at. Because like we talked about with the Big East collapse, it kind of vaporized the Conference USA, which when I was growing up was one of the most interesting kind of low-level conferences. It was more or less what the American or the Mountain West is today, with the conglomeration of interesting non-BCS, non-power programs all in one area. In the 2004 season, this is what Conference USA looked like. It was Louisville, Cincinnati, Memphis, Tulane, UAB, TCU, Houston, USF, ECU, Southern Miss, and Army. And it was really good this year. 3 of the teams were ranked at some point. Memphis finished 8-4. They got as high as 25th in the AP poll. Southern Miss was 21 at one point in the AP poll, and Louisville went 11-1 and finished number 6 in the AP poll after beating number 10 Boise State in the Liberty Bowl 44-40. An incredible, probably one of the best non-BCS bowl games of this era. But ultimately, that conference got pulled apart when the Big East collapsed, or at least eventually was going to collapse. Once the demise was imminent, they started to pull out the best parts of this conference. Louisville, Cincinnati, South Florida all joined the Big East in 2005. But what if, instead of that happening, when the Big East collapsed in our scenario here, and the BCS said, all right, we're going to look to see if there should be another BCS conference, or if we should just reduce the number to 5 of the current BCS conferences that are still surviving. What if the Big East said, or if Conference USA said, all right, what we're going to do is put all the money we can into going and getting West Virginia, adding West Virginia to this conference, getting to 12 teams, which at that point was very important so they could get a conference championship game, and using this 3-year period to push as much as we can to getting a BCS slot. Because I think West Virginia really fits into what Conference USA was doing at this point. They're kind of not the sexiest program in the world. They're kind of not the most well-known program in the world. Maybe they're not from one of these cities that the Conference USA was kind of about, was being city colleges, but they still are in this geographic footprint and definitely have the level of success that Conference USA would have needed to add into this to get to that BCS level. And I really think that, West Virginia was on the rise as a college football program under Rich Rodriguez. Louisville obviously was having a ton of success. Memphis was a strong program at the time. USF was starting to grow as well. ECU, people forget ECU in the early 2010s was a very strong college football program. Of course, having the strength of Army. TCU was starting to grow as well. So this really would have been a program or a conference on the up and up if they were able to add in West Virginia at this time. And there was really only one other conference that would have been able to try to push up for that BCS status, and that was the Mountain West of 2004. This conference looked like BYU, Utah, Air Force, Colorado State, Wyoming, UNLV, New Mexico, and San Diego State. Now, really, this version of the conference is being buoyed by BYU and Utah specifically. San Diego State obviously is a strong program as well, but wasn't the same level of program that BYU and Utah were at the time. This is the Urban Meyer era of Utah, and of course BYU has been BYU for a very long time and will continue to be BYU. Good, bad, and ugly. But there were two other programs out west that were having a lot of success in the non-AQ, non-BCS, non-power kind of conference sphere, and that was Boise State and Fresno State. Boise State was relatively new to FBS or Division 1A at the time, only joining in 1996. But at this time, going in 2004, like we talked about, they were number 10 in the country when they took on Louisville in the Liberty Bowl. They were 11-1 that season. They won the WAC, 8-0 in the conference. They were coming off of 2003, where they were 13-1, won the WAC, 16th in the AP poll. 2002, 12-1, 15th in the AP poll. So this was their third straight season of double-digit wins and only one loss. And they were about to get into the Chris Peterson era starting in 2006. So they were really the program on the rise out there. And Boise State has always had trouble breaking into that top level. They were actually going to join the Big East in 2013 before it all collapsed, because the Big East was going to be like a nationwide conference before it collapsed. But Boise State was on the rise very much so and establishing themselves as one of the best non-AQ teams. And Fresno State at this time was also pushing at double-digit wins. I think they had in the same time that Boise State had those 11-win and 12-win and 13-win seasons, Fresno State was 9 wins almost each of those seasons. So two very strong teams that were in one of the weakest conferences in the WAC that could have very easily joined the Mountain West in this 2004 frenzy to go ahead and push for that additional BCS conference status that the Mountain West could have attained if not for Conference USA. Now, that's all well and good, right? Those are two really strong, but pretty obviously not quite the same level as the Pac-10, the Big 10, the Big 12, the ACC that we put together, and the SEC of this time. They weren't quite on that same level. Now, the Big East did find that BCS conference status, even though they were almost clearly not the same level as everybody else, but they had Miami, and they were there at the beginning of the BCS, so they got that kind of grandfathered in status. But these other two conferences would not have had the same luxury of that. Even though they had some great top-level programs at the time, they would not have been looked at as equals. So instead of these two programs just kind of going up and gobbling up the other teams that might have that, kind of higher level non-AQ status, what if something else happened? What if in the frenzy of all of the Big East movement and the kind of chase of the BCS conference status, what if the top-level teams throughout the non-AQ world got together and said, we are going to create an all-star conference of G5 or non-AQ teams and go after the BCS status as a group? This is what that might have looked like. Splitting into two divisions, the West looks like Utah, TCU, Fresno State, Houston, Boise State, and BYU. And the East is Louisville, Cincinnati, Southern Miss, Memphis, West Virginia, and Tulane. Now, this is a whole different presentation of the BCS, a whole different presentation to the rest of the country, because all of these teams have shown success at the national level, whether it was in the 2000s, in the 90s, or previously, maybe in Houston's case previously, but all of these teams have shown success at the national level. A couple of these teams had already been in a top-level conference with the Southwest Conference in TCU and Houston, and all but 4 of these teams are currently in a power conference, with Southern Miss, Memphis, Boise State, and Fresno State being the only teams. Oh, Tulane, all but 5 are currently in a power conference. But Tulane had previously been in the SEC. So all of these teams have had not just success in college football or success in college basketball, but they have had kind of the taste of the big time at this point. And like we talked about, Louisville, Boise State, Fresno State, Utah, West Virginia at this time, BYU, they all were successful programs. This conference could have very easily had 5 top 25 teams at any point during the seasons if they were to put this together starting in 2005. They definitely could have had not just top level success, but those mid-tier teams that the Big East wasn't having at that time, that in many cases, the Pac-10 or the Big 10 or even the Big 12 at these times weren't having that kind of mid-level success, which is really the hallmark of a power conference, having those top 25 teams that might not be the best teams in your conference, but they add to the resumes of the best teams. But they can go out and beat teams from other power conferences. And that's what this conference would really have. Now, the downside of this is that this conference might just have those teams, right? It might not have a Louisville pushing all the way through the top or a Boise State pushing all the way through the top if they had to play each other every single season. But I do think that iron sharpens iron, and each of these teams would have gotten stronger in this conference with other strong teams. But there is definitely that possibility that it's just a middling conference. But even then, that's still matches or beats what the Big East was post 2005. And this conference is a monster in college basketball as well. Utah's successful college basketball program, BYU, but really Louisville and West Virginia under Rick Pitino and Bob Huggins, respectively, were very, very strong basketball programs in the mid to late 2000s, and West Virginia even in the early 2010s. They were a very, very strong set of basketball programs, and that's not to mention Cincinnati, Memphis, what they were able to do, and Houston, which maybe has come a little later on, but Houston definitely has history in college basketball, i.e. Phi, Slamma Jamma, and then, they went to the national championship last season. So this is not a conference of chumps. This is actually kind of a scary conference if you're the rest of college football. If you are wanting to kind of be able to peel apart, and I don't know that was the plans of the conference at that point, but if the idea is that you're going to peel apart the rest of the country and get what you want to expand your conference footprint, this is a scary idea, because this is strong enough to keep those teams from wanting to go elsewhere. This conference can get media contracts. This conference can pay these schools more handsomely than they ever had been paid before. And this can find success at a national level, not just in college football, not just in college basketball, but throughout college sports, because these teams sponsor strong programs throughout. That is the scary thing here, because with this conference, the Pac-12 probably doesn't get Utah. Maybe the Pac-12 never becomes a Pac-12. It's not the Pac-10. I don't think TCU goes to the Big 12, because I don't know that Texas A&M and Missouri go to the SEC with this conference. I don't think that the ACC is going to get Louisville. I don't think that the ACC is going to get, or the Big 12 is going to get West Virginia. I think that this conference stays together and kind of offsets the realignment that was to come in the early 2010s with the Big 12 almost falling apart, the Pac-12 forming, the Big 10 expanding, all of those things that happened in the early 2010s. But thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe and hype the video. It helps me as a small content creator, and I could use all the help I can get. And if you made it this far, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Like I said, name the conference if you have a name for it. Do you think that this would ever happen in any form of reality? Do you think that the Big East should have stayed together and they made the right choice by trying to kind of keep it going at that point? Or do you think that the ACC is interested in any of those teams that they would have pulled in our scenario in 2005? Other than that, if you want to watch more of my videos, I do have those for you. Right here, I've got my most recent video, which is about a 3-tiered college football conference system, which I think could make sense in today's college football, so check that one out. Up here, I've got my more popular video of recent memory, which is another conference realignment remix if the Penn State never joined the Big Ten in 1989, so go ahead and check that one out if you're interested. Other than that, I got my subscribe link on this side, and we'll check you next time. See ya!